Alcatraz Island, sitting in the middle of San Francisco Bay, is one of the most famous prisons in the world. Surrounded by cold waters and strong currents, it was built to hold the country's most dangerous criminals. Known as the Rock, it was a symbol of absolute security, with iron bars, guard towers, and strict rules making escape seem impossible. From 1934 to 1963, Alcatraz housed criminals who had caused trouble in other prisons. These included notorious names like Al Capone, George Machine Gun Kelly, and the infamous Birdman of Alcatraz. It was a place designed to break the toughest of men. No one was supposed to get out. But in June 1962, something happened that shocked the world. 3 prisoners, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, disappeared from their cells overnight. They didn't just walk out. They planned and worked for months to pull off what many believed was impossible. On the morning of June 12, the guards made their usual rounds, expecting to see the prisoners in their cells. Instead, they found dummy heads in the beds made from plaster, paint, and real hair. The fake heads were so convincing that the guards didn't realize anything was wrong until hours later. The prison went into lockdown, and the escape quickly became one of the most famous cases in FBI history. Questions started to rise immediately. How did these men escape a place like Alcatraz? What tools did they use? Did they have help? And the biggest question of all, did they survive the freezing, dangerous waters of San Francisco Bay? The FBI launched a massive investigation, but no one could find the men. Over the years, bits of evidence have surfaced, but nothing has ever confirmed whether Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers made it out alive or if their escape ended in the bay. This story is not just about a daring escape. It's about courage, planning, and determination. It's about the lengths people will go to for freedom. Decades later, the fate of these 3 men remains unknown, leaving us with one of history's greatest mysteries. In this video, we'll break down the events of that night, the months of preparation that led to the escape, and the evidence that has kept this case alive for over 60 years. Alcatraz wasn't just any prison, it was a fortress built to hold the country's most dangerous criminals. Located on a lonely island in San Francisco Bay, it was surrounded by freezing waters and strong currents that acted as a natural barrier. For decades, Alcatraz stood as a symbol of punishment and isolation. The island's use as a prison dates back to the Civil War, but it became a maximum security federal penitentiary in 1934. This was during the height of America's war on crime. Authorities needed a place to house criminals who were too difficult to control in other prisons. Alcatraz, with its solid rock foundation and isolation, was the perfect choice. The prison was designed to be escape-proof. Its structure included reinforced iron bars, tough cell doors, and a layout that made any attempt to leave nearly impossible. Guard towers were positioned strategically, and the guards themselves were among the most vigilant in the system. Inside, prisoners were checked multiple times a day, and the strict rules made life hard. Some of America's most notorious criminals were sent to Alcatraz. Al Capone, one of the most infamous gangsters in history, spent several years there. He was followed by others like George Machine Gun Kelly, known for his armed robberies, and Alvin Creepy Karpis, a bank robber and kidnapper. Even the Birdman of Alcatraz, Robert Stroud, gained fame for his time there, though he was not allowed to keep birds during his stay on the island. Despite its reputation, life in Alcatraz was harsh and monotonous. Prisoners were expected to follow strict schedules. Each day was a cycle of work, meals, and confinement. Even the smallest act of defiance could lead to severe punishment, including time in the dreaded D block, where inmates were kept in total isolation. The design of the prison made escape nearly impossible. The cells were small and tightly secured. The outer walls were thick, and the prison itself sat 1.25 miles away from the nearest shore. The waters of San Francisco Bay were cold and rough, with strong currents that could easily pull a swimmer under. For most inmates, the idea of escaping was not even worth considering. But that didn't stop everyone from trying. Between 1934 and the prison's closure in 1963, 36 prisoners attempted 14 separate escapes. Some were caught, others were killed, and a few drowned in the icy waters. None, however, were officially recorded as having succeeded. By the early 1960s, Alcatraz was beginning to show its age. The cost of maintaining the prison was far higher than other facilities, and the isolated location made it difficult to operate efficiently. In 1963, the prison was officially shut down, ending its nearly 30 years as the most secure prison in America. Yet, even after its closure, Alcatraz left behind a legacy of fear, isolation, and intrigue. It remains a symbol of justice and punishment, and the stories of those who lived and tried to escape there continue to captivate people around the world. Frank Morris arrived at Alcatraz in January 1960. He wasn't your average prisoner. He had spent much of his life in and out of prison for crimes like bank robbery and burglary. Known for his intelligence, Morris had an IQ that placed him in the top 2% of the population. But what truly set him apart was his history of escaping from other prisons. Authorities believed Alcatraz would be the one place he couldn't break out of. In the months following Morris's arrival, John Anglin was transferred to Alcatraz. John, like Morris, had a history of crime. Along with his brother Clarence, he had participated in a string of bank robberies across the southern United States. The Anglin brothers grew up in a large, poor farming family in Georgia. They were close, sticking together through thick and thin. Their preference for non-violent crime using fake weapons during their robberies didn't save them from being sent to one of the toughest prisons in the country. Clarence Anglin joined his brother at Alcatraz in early 1961, and the two were reunited behind bars. The three men, Morris and the Anglin brothers, knew each other from their time in other prisons. Their shared history made it easy for them to work together when they found themselves in adjoining cells at Alcatraz. It didn't take long for them to start planning their escape. Their determination was fueled by a shared belief. Alcatraz was not the end for them. Frank Morris quickly became the leader of the group. His intelligence, combined with his experience in escaping other facilities, made him the ideal person to plan their way out. The Anglin brothers brought loyalty and teamwork to the table, while another inmate, Alan West, added his mechanical skills. West had a reputation for being resourceful, and he was eager to contribute. The escape plan began to take shape in December 1961. It was clear from the start that this would not be a simple operation. Alcatraz was designed to be escape-proof, with its reinforced iron bars, thick walls, and constant surveillance. On top of that, the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay made the idea of swimming to safety nearly impossible. The men knew they had to be creative if they were going to succeed. The first step was to gain access to the utility corridor behind their cells. Each cell had a small vent at the back, covered with a metal grill. Using saw blades they had stolen from the prison's workshops, the men began to chip away at the concrete surrounding the vents. This was painstaking work, done in small increments to avoid detection. To speed up the process, they created a homemade drill using the motor from a broken vacuum cleaner. They used the drill to make closely spaced holes around the edges of the vents, eventually loosening them enough to remove the entire grill. To hide their progress, they covered the holes with cardboard or other materials that blended into the cell walls. Once the vents were removed, the men could crawl into the utility corridor. This unguarded space became their gateway to freedom and their secret workshop. On top of the cell block, hidden from view, they began assembling the tools and equipment they would need for the escape. One of their most impressive creations was a rubber raft, made from more than 50 raincoats they had stolen or gathered over time. The raincoats were stitched together and then vulcanized or sealed using heat from the prison steam pipes. The seams had to be strong enough to withstand the rough waters of the bay. In addition to the raft, the men made life vests using the same raincoat material. They also crafted wooden paddles to help them navigate the water. To inflate the raft, they converted a musical instrument into an improvised pump. Each item was carefully hidden in the workshop, waiting for the night of the escape. As they worked, the men remained vigilant. They knew that being caught would mean severe punishment or even death. To avoid detection, they took turns keeping watch for guards. They even built a small periscope out of mirrors, which allowed them to see down the corridor while staying out of sight. Alan West, however, faced unique challenges. His cell was slightly different from the others, and the vent in his cell proved harder to remove. Despite this, he played a crucial role in gathering materials and assisting with the construction of the raft and other tools. The group's plan also included creating dummy heads to place in their beds on the night of the escape. These heads, made from plaster, paint, and human hair taken from the prison barbershop, were so realistic that they fooled the guards during their nighttime inspections. By June 1962, the plan was nearly complete. The men had everything they needed: tools to escape their cells, a raft to cross the bay, and disguises to delay the discovery of their absence. All that remained was to pick the right moment. Months of hard work, patience, and ingenuity had brought them to this point. Frank Morris, John Anglin, Clarence Anglin, and Alan West were about to attempt one of the most daring escapes in history. They knew the risks: they could be caught, or they could die in the attempt. But for them, the chance of freedom was worth everything. For the escape to succeed, it wasn't enough to slip past the guards. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers needed a detailed plan that addressed every obstacle: getting out of their cells, avoiding detection, and surviving the treacherous waters of San Francisco Bay. It would take months of preparation, ingenuity, and teamwork to bring their plan to life. The first challenge was the cell vents. Each cell had a small vent at the back, designed for air circulation. The men realized that if they could remove these vents, they could crawl into the utility corridor behind their cell space that wasn't guarded. But the vents were secured with concrete and metal, and removing them required tools the prisoners didn't have. Morris and his team started by scavenging materials from around the prison. They stole old saw blades from the prison's workshop and used them to cut through the concrete surrounding the vents. This was a slow, grueling process. To make it more efficient, they built a crude drill using the motor from a broken vacuum cleaner. With this drill, they could bore small, closely spaced holes around the edges of the vents, making it easier to pry them loose. The work had to be done in secret. The men chipped away at the vents only during times when they wouldn't be heard, such as during music practice or other noisy activities. Each night, after making progress, they carefully covered the holes with cardboard or other materials to ensure that guards wouldn't notice the changes. Once the vents were removed, the men had access to the utility corridor. This narrow space ran behind their cells and provided a hidden pathway to other parts of the prison. It also became their workshop, a place where they could assemble the tools and equipment they needed for the next stage of their escape. On top of the cell block, in a concealed area that wasn't visible to the guards, the men began constructing their most critical piece of equipment, a makeshift raft. The raft was made from more than 50 raincoats that they had stolen or gathered over time. Using sewing needles and thread they had improvised, they stitched the raincoats together, creating a large rectangular sheet of waterproof material. To ensure the seams were strong and watertight, they used a process called vulcanization. This involved applying heat and pressure to seal the seams. The men used the prison's steam pipes as a heat source and a heavy wooden plank to press the seams together. The result was a durable raft, large enough to carry all 3 escapees across the bay. In addition to the raft, the men made life vests out of the same raincoat material. These vests were essential for their survival, as the waters of San Francisco Bay were cold and unpredictable. They also crafted wooden paddles, which they planned to use to navigate the raft through the water. Inflating the raft posed another challenge. The men found a solution by converting a concertina type of musical instrument into an air pump. This ingenious device allowed them to inflate the raft quickly and efficiently, even under the difficult conditions they were likely to face. While the raft and life vests were critical, they weren't the only parts of the plan. The men also needed a way to delay the discovery of their escape. To achieve this, they created dummy heads to place in their beds. These heads were made from a combination of plaster, soap, paint, and human hair, which they collected from the prison barber shop. The finished products were so lifelike that they fooled the guards during nighttime bed checks. The next step was figuring out how to leave the building. The utility corridor led to the top of the cell block, but from there, the men needed to find a way out. After exploring their options, they discovered a ventilation shaft that led to the roof. The shaft was covered with a metal grill, which they managed to loosen using makeshift tools. To keep the grill in place until the night of the escape, they fashioned a fake bolt out of soap. From the roof, the men planned to climb down a pipe to the ground. This part of the plan required careful timing, as they needed to avoid being seen by guards in the watchtowers. Once on the ground, they would make their way to the shore and launch their raft into the bay. Despite their progress, the plan was not without setbacks. Alan West, the fourth member of the group, struggled to remove the vent in his cell. This delay would ultimately prevent him from escaping with the others. Even so, West played a vital role in gathering materials and helping to construct the raft and other equipment. By June 1962, the men were ready. Months of preparation had brought them to this point. They had tools to escape their cells, equipment to survive the bay, and a detailed route that would take them to freedom. But they knew the risks. The waters of San Francisco Bay were freezing, with strong currents that could easily pull a swimmer under. And even if they made it to land, they would still need to evade capture. The plan required precision and nerves of steel. Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin were determined to see it through, no matter the cost. For them, freedom was worth any risk. June 11th, 1962. The night had finally arrived. Months of planning, preparation, and hard work were about to be tested. The prison was quiet, with most of the guards and inmates unaware of what was about to unfold. Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin were ready to make their move. In their cells, they made their final preparations, placing the realistic dummy heads in their beds. These heads made from plaster, paint, and real human hair were carefully positioned to make it look like the prisoners were sound asleep. They had been working on these decoys for weeks, knowing they would play a critical role in buying them time. At lights out, the three men began the first step of their escape. One by one, they crawled through the holes they had created behind their vents. The holes, concealed for months, now provided a direct route into the utility corridor. They moved quickly but quietly, knowing any sound could draw attention from the guards. Alan West, however, was struggling. Despite his efforts, he hadn't been able to fully remove the vent in his cell. He tried desperately to pry it loose, but the metal grill refused to budge. As the minutes ticked by, it became clear that he wasn't going to make it out. West was left behind, while Morris and the Anglin brothers pressed on. Once in the utility corridor, the three escapees gathered the tools and equipment they had hidden in their secret workshop. The raft, life vests, and paddles were ready. They moved carefully, carrying everything they needed as they climbed up to the ventilation shaft leading to the roof. Reaching the roof was no easy task. The shaft was narrow, and the climb required strength and precision. But Morris and the Anglins had prepared for this. They had loosened the metal grill covering the shaft weeks earlier, and now they carefully removed it. To avoid suspicion, they replaced the grill with the fake bolt they had fashioned from soap. Once on the roof, the men paused to assess their surroundings. The guards in the watchtowers were armed, and one wrong move could mean being spotted. They stuck to the shadows, moving slowly and deliberately toward the edge of the building. Their next challenge was climbing down to the ground. Using a pipe near the roof, the men carefully shimmied down to the rear of the building. From there, they made their way to the northeast shore of the island, avoiding the prison's floodlights and patrols. When they reached the shore, they worked quickly to assemble their raft. The raincoat material, which had been folded and hidden during their journey, was now inflated using their homemade pump. The life vests were tested and secured, and the paddles were readied. The waters of San Francisco Bay were as cold and dangerous as they had anticipated. Strong currents and frigid temperatures made the crossing a daunting task. But Morris and the Anglins were determined. They launched the raft into the water and began paddling into the darkness. Back in the prison, the guards remained unaware of what was happening. The decoy heads in the beds did their job, fooling the guards during their routine bed checks. It wasn't until morning, during the official head count, that the escape was discovered. The reaction was immediate. The prison went into lockdown, and a massive search operation was launched. Guards scoured the island, while the Coast Guard began searching the waters around Alcatraz. Helicopters and boats patrolled the bay, but there was no sign of the escapees. As the first light of dawn broke over San Francisco Bay, the three men were gone. Their fate, whether they had reached freedom or perished in the icy waters, remained a mystery. This night, filled with daring and desperation, marked the beginning of one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. The morning of June 12, 1962, began with chaos at Alcatraz. During the routine head count, guards discovered the beds of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were empty. At first glance, it appeared they were still sleeping, but when a guard reached into the bed, the head rolled off. It wasn't a prisoner, it was a decoy, carefully crafted from plaster, paint, and human hair. The alarm was raised, and the prison went into immediate lockdown. Guards searched every inch of the facility, but Morris and the Anglins were nowhere to be found. Attention quickly turned to the waters surrounding the island, where the first clues began to surface. The FBI was brought in to lead the investigation, along with the Coast Guard and local law enforcement. Their first step was to interview Alan West, the inmate who had been left behind. West, eager to avoid punishment, provided detailed information about the escape plan. He described how the group had loosened their cell vents, used the utility corridor, and built a raft and life vests from raincoats. As the search continued, evidence of the escape began to emerge. A few days after the breakout, guards found a piece of wood resembling a paddle floating in the water. The brass bolts on the paddle matched those used in the escapees' homemade paddles. This confirmed that the men had made it to the water. Not long after, a packet of letters was discovered near the shoreline. Sealed in rubber, the packet contained personal correspondence belonging to the Anglin brothers. Investigators believe the letters had been carried in the raft and had fallen out during the crossing. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence was a life vest that washed up on Cronkite Beach, several miles from Alcatraz. The vest, made from raincoat material, matched the descriptions provided by West. It was carefully constructed, with seams that had been vulcanized using the prison's steam pipes. Despite these discoveries, no sign of the men themselves was ever found. The waters of San Francisco Bay were treacherous, with strong currents and freezing temperatures. Many believed that the men had drowned, their bodies pulled out to sea. To test this theory, the FBI conducted extensive simulations. They studied the bay's currents and weather conditions on the night of the escape. The results were mixed. While the currents were strong, it was possible for the men to have made it to land if they timed their crossing correctly. Investigators also considered the possibility that the escapees had help from the outside. They interviewed the families of Morris and the Anglins, but found no evidence of assistance. The families had no financial means to support such a plan, and none of them had received any communication from the escapees. The case drew national attention, and tips poured in from across the country. People claimed to have seen the men in various locations, but none of these sightings could be verified. Despite the high-profile nature of the escape, no credible evidence emerged to suggest the men were still alive. Over the years, more items have been recovered from the bay that may be linked to the escape. A piece of the raft was reportedly found on Angel Island, just over a mile from Alcatraz. This suggested that the men might have made it to land before vanishing. However, the lack of concrete evidence left many questions unanswered. Did they survive the crossing? If so, where did they go? And how did they avoid being caught? The investigation continued for 17 years, but by 1979, the FBI officially closed the case. Responsibility for the search was turned over to the U.S. Marshals Service, which still considers the men fugitives to this day. The evidence trail may have grown cold, but the mystery of the Alcatraz escape remains as intriguing as ever. The escape from Alcatraz remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Decades after the daring breakout, people are still divided over the fate of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers. Did they defy the odds and make it to freedom, or did the cold, treacherous waters of San Francisco Bay claim their lives? Investigators and experts have proposed multiple theories over the years, and the evidence has fueled endless speculation. Theory 1. They drowned in the bay. The official conclusion of the FBI was that the escapees likely drowned. The waters surrounding Alcatraz are notoriously dangerous, with strong currents and freezing temperatures. On the night of the escape, conditions were especially challenging. The bay's currents tend to flow toward the Golden Gate Bridge and out to the Pacific Ocean. Experts believe that if the men fell off their raft, or if it deflated, they would have been swept away, unable to survive the icy water. Adding to this theory is the lack of credible sightings or evidence of the men living after the escape. Over the years, no bodies were ever recovered, but authorities argue that the strong currents could have carried them far out to sea. Theory 2. They survived and made it to Angel Island. Despite the challenges, many believe that Morris and the Anglins managed to survive. Angel Island, located about 1.5 miles from Alcatraz, was the most logical destination for the escapees. Supporting this theory is the discovery of a makeshift paddle and a piece of the raft near Angel Island. These items suggest that the men could have reached land even if their raft partially failed during the journey. In recent years, experiments have shown that the escape was physically possible. Researchers and adventurers have recreated the crossing using similar equipment, proving that a strong paddler could navigate the bay's currents and reach Angel Island. Theory 3. Assistance from the outside. Another possibility is that the men had help from the outside. This theory suggests that someone might have been waiting for them with a boat near the shore of Alcatraz or Angel Island. This theory, however, is difficult to prove. Investigators interviewed the families of the escapees, but found no evidence of outside assistance. The families lacked the resources to fund such a plan, and none of them admitted to helping the men. Still, some believe that the escapees could have arranged for assistance without leaving a trace. It's possible that they had an unknown accomplice who was never identified. Theory 4. They changed identities and lived quiet lives. One of the most intriguing theories is that the escapees successfully disappeared and lived the rest of their lives under new identities. Supporters of this theory point to the Anglin brothers' resourcefulness and Morris's intelligence. In 2013, the case gained renewed attention when a letter allegedly written by one of the Anglin brothers surfaced. The letter claimed that all 3 escapees had survived the escape and lived quietly for years. However, the authenticity of the letter remains unverified, and law enforcement agencies continue to treat it with skepticism. Photographs and reports over the years have also suggested possible sightings of the Anglin brothers in South America. Some witnesses claim to have seen them living in Brazil, but these accounts were never confirmed. Theory 5. They perished but left no trace. Some believe that while the escapees might not have drowned immediately, they could have died shortly after reaching land. The conditions of the Bay Area, including cold temperatures and rough terrain, could have made survival difficult even if they made it out of the water. In this scenario, the men might have succumbed to hypothermia or exhaustion before they could get far. Their bodies may have been lost in remote areas, leaving no evidence behind. The legacy of the mystery. Regardless of the theories, the escape from Alcatraz has captivated people for decades. It's a story of ingenuity, determination, and the human spirit's drive for freedom. The evidence leaves just enough room for doubt, allowing the mystery to endure. To this day, the U.S. Marshals Service keeps the case open. While it's unlikely the escapees are still alive, Frank Morris would be in his 90s, and the Anglin brothers would be close to the same age. The possibility keeps people searching for answers. The escape has inspired countless books, movies, and debates. It challenges the idea that Alcatraz was inescapable and raises questions about what truly happened on that fateful night in 1962. The truth about the fate of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers may never be known, but their story lives on as one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. More than 60 years have passed since Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers disappeared into the night. Their daring escape has become a legend, etched into the history of Alcatraz and American crime. The escape is more than just a story of three men fleeing a maximum security prison. It's a story of human ingenuity, courage, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. The odds were stacked against the iron bars, watchful guards, and the unforgiving waters of San Francisco Bay. Yet, they dared to challenge it all. Even today, the escape raises more questions than answers. Did the men survive? If so, how did they build new lives without leaving a trace? Or did they meet their end in the cold, dark waters surrounding the island? For many, the mystery is what keeps the story alive. The evidence, dummy heads, handmade tools, and pieces of the raft paints a picture of meticulous planning. But the lack of definitive proof about their fate fuels endless speculation. The escape from Alcatraz is more than a historical event. It has become a cultural phenomenon. It has inspired books, documentaries, and Hollywood films. It has sparked debates among experts and enthusiasts, and even today, it draws tourists to Alcatraz Island, eager to walk the halls of the infamous prison and imagine the events of that June night. In 1979, the FBI officially closed its investigation, but the U.S. Marshals Service continues to keep the case open. The escapees are still considered fugitives, and the Marshals occasionally receive tips from people claiming to have seen or known them. While it's unlikely the men are still alive, the possibility keeps the mystery alive. What makes this story so enduring? Perhaps it's the audacity of the escape, the idea that three men took on what was thought to be impossible and may have succeeded. Or perhaps it's the sense of unfinished business, the lingering question of what really happened after they left the island. The legacy of the escape is not just about the men who disappeared, it's also about Alcatraz itself. Once a symbol of inescapable punishment, the prison has become a place of fascination, a reminder of both the harshness of the system and the resilience of the human spirit. As we look back on the events of 1962, one thing is certain: the escape from Alcatraz remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Whether Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers lived or died, their story continues to captivate and inspire. The rock may no longer hold prisoners, but its walls still echo with the tales of those who lived there. And somewhere, whether in the waters of San Francisco Bay or far beyond, the story of the escape lives on, untamed, unanswered, and unforgettable. The story of the Alcatraz escape is one that keeps us questioning, wondering, and imagining the possibilities. What do you think happened to Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers? Did they beat the odds, or did the waters claim them? We'd love to hear your theories. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories of crime, mystery, and human determination. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for our next true crime story.